From today, you're my husband." The words landed so softly that for a moment Elijah Brooks thought he had heard them wrong. He sat across from the largest desk he had ever seen, staring at the woman on the other side. Evelyn Sterling didn't smile. She didn't repeat herself. She simply slid a thin stack of papers across the polished surface and waited. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, downtown Chicago shimmered beneath a gray spring sky. 52 stories below, traffic crawled through the city like streams of light. Up here, everything felt strangely quiet. Elijah looked down at the papers. His name was already printed on the first page. He blinked once. Then again. 3 days ago, he had signed different papers. Divorce papers. 15 years of marriage reduced to signatures, stamps, and a handshake from a judge who had probably forgotten his name before lunch. He had told himself he was fine. Told himself he was focused on Noah. Told himself life would keep moving. But now he was sitting in the office of one of the most powerful CEOs in Illinois, holding a document that made even less sense than the one he had signed 3 days earlier. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I think there has to be some mistake." Evelyn folded her hands. "There isn't." Her voice was calm, precise, the kind of voice that made boardrooms go silent. Elijah shifted in his chair. The maintenance badge clipped to his belt suddenly felt heavier than usual. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't an executive. He wasn't even supposed to be here. 2 hours earlier, he had been replacing a damaged air filter on the 17th floor. Then a message came through security asking him to report directly to the executive suite. Most employees spent years in the Sterling Tower without ever seeing Evelyn Sterling in person. Elijah had seen her exactly twice. Once in an elevator. Once from across a company holiday event. Neither interaction explained why she was now asking him to marry her. "Why me?" he asked. For the first time, something flickered behind her eyes. Not hesitation. Not uncertainty. Something harder to define. Tiredness, maybe. The kind that sleep couldn't fix. Evelyn glanced toward the windows. The skyline reflected across the glass behind her. "Because you're the only person I trust." Elijah almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it made no sense. Trust? She didn't know him. She knew employee records. Work reports. Background checks. She didn't know the man who packed school lunches before sunrise. The father who spent Friday nights helping a 9-year-old build science fair projects at the kitchen table. The man who sometimes sat awake long after midnight wondering if he was doing enough. "You don't know me," he said quietly. Evelyn looked directly at him. "I know enough." The room fell silent again. Somewhere beyond the closed office doors, the machinery of a billion-dollar company continued turning. Meetings, calls, deadlines, decisions. But inside that office, time seemed to slow. Elijah looked at the papers one more time, then back at the woman who had just changed the direction of his entire week with a single sentence. And for the first time, he noticed something unexpected. The most powerful woman in the building looked lonelier than he felt. Elijah stared at the documents for several more seconds before carefully sliding them back across the desk. The paper felt expensive, heavy, important. Everything in this office felt important. Everything except the answer he was waiting for. Evelyn remained still. Her expression barely changed, yet something about the silence between them felt less like authority and more like exhaustion. Outside, clouds drifted over the city, casting moving shadows across the glass towers below. Finally, Elijah stood. "I appreciate your confidence, ma'am, but I think you should find someone else." He adjusted the sleeve of his work shirt and offered a polite nod. "I am not the man you are looking for." He turned toward the door. "Sit down, Mr. Brooks." The words were calm, not sharp, not demanding. Somehow that made them harder to ignore. Elijah paused, then slowly returned to his chair. Evelyn opened a folder resting beside her. Inside were photographs, reports, and financial summaries. She pushed one page toward him. Sterling Industries. Revenue charts. Shareholder projections. Numbers stretching farther than Elijah cared to read. 3 months ago, Evelyn said, "My father passed away." Her voice remained steady, but the air in the room changed. He left controlling shares of the company in a family trust. Elijah listened quietly. "The trust contains conditions." She paused. "One of those conditions states that I must demonstrate family stability before the final transfer of voting control." Elijah frowned. "Family stability? Marriage?" She nodded once. "And if I fail, control moves to other parties." Elijah glanced down at the report. How much control are we talking about? Evelyn gave a humorless smile. Enough to remove me as chief executive officer within 6 months. The number itself did not matter. Elijah could hear it in her voice. This was not about money. It was about something she had spent years building. Something slipping away. You could marry anyone, he said. There are probably thousands of men willing to volunteer. That is exactly the problem. Evelyn closed the folder. Too many people are interested in what I own. The room became quiet again. She rose from her chair and walked toward the windows. From this height, the city looked small, ordered, predictable. Yet Elijah suspected her life felt anything but predictable. Last year, she continued, a snowstorm shut down half the city. Most executives worked remotely. Most managers stayed home. She looked out at the skyline. You walked 3 miles through the snow because a maintenance crew was short-staffed. Elijah blinked. He barely remembered that day. A few months later, an employee's son needed emergency transportation after school. You drove him home because nobody else could leave a meeting. She continued before he could respond. You donate vacation days. You volunteer at science fairs. You never ask for recognition. Elijah shifted uncomfortably. How do you know all that? Evelyn looked back at him. Because when people are genuinely kind, others remember. For the first time since entering the office, Elijah did not know what to say. He was used to being overlooked. Invisible, sometimes. Most days he preferred it that way. Evelyn slowly returned to her desk. I am not asking because I need a husband, Mr. Brooks. Her fingers rested lightly on the edge of the papers. I am asking because I need someone I can trust around something more important than this company. Elijah frowned. What is more important than the company? For the first time, the confident CEO hesitated. Only for a second. Then she opened a framed photograph sitting beside her desk. A small blonde girl smiled at the camera while holding a sketchbook against her chest. Maybe 10 years old. Maybe 11. Evelyn's gaze softened. My niece, Sophie. She swallowed quietly. And she is the reason I cannot afford to lose. Elijah looked at the photograph for a long moment. The girl in the picture seemed happy. The kind of happy that belonged in ordinary places. A school play. A birthday party. A Saturday afternoon at the park. Not inside boardrooms and legal documents. He carefully handed the frame back. She is your niece? Evelyn nodded. Her parents died several years ago. Her voice remained controlled, but something quieter lived beneath it. Since then, I have been responsible for her. Elijah lowered his eyes. He knew something about responsibility. He knew what it felt like to have someone depending on you every morning when the alarm clock rang. He knew what it felt like to keep moving even when life became heavier than expected. I am sorry, he said softly. Evelyn gave a small nod of appreciation. Then she surprised him. Sophie is 12 now. Smart. Creative. Stubborn. The corner of her mouth moved slightly. She also happens to hate every man who has ever tried to impress me. Elijah almost smiled. Can you blame her? For the first time, Evelyn let out a short laugh. It vanished quickly, but it was real. The room felt different afterward. Less like a negotiation. More like two people talking. The trust attorneys are watching everything, Evelyn explained. The board is watching. Investors are watching. They all believe they understand my life. She glanced toward the city beyond the glass. What they do not understand is that I am trying to protect a child from becoming a headline. Elijah understood that immediately. Noah was not surrounded by wealth or reporters, but every parent understood the instinct. Protect first. Explain later. You still have not answered my question, he said. Why me? Evelyn leaned back in her chair. Because you are the first person who has said no. Elijah frowned. She continued before he could speak. Every consultant wanted a contract. Every candidate wanted access. Every introduction came with expectations. Her eyes met his. You wanted to leave. Silence settled between them. Outside, the afternoon sunlight briefly broke through the clouds. Reflections danced across the office walls. Elijah thought about Noah waiting at home. About homework spread across the kitchen table. About the model rocket they had promised to finish that weekend. His life was simple. Not easy, but simple. This was not simple. Not even close. He rose from his chair again. I cannot give you an answer today. Evelyn seemed unsurprised. I was not expecting one. Elijah nodded. Then he paused near the office door. For what it is worth, he said, glancing back toward the photograph on her desk. Your niece looks like a good kid. Something softened in Evelyn's expression. Not the CEO. Not the executive, just the aunt. She is. Elijah opened the door. Then maybe she deserves more than another business arrangement. He stepped into the hallway and quietly closed the door behind him. Inside the office, Evelyn remained seated. Outside, Elijah walked toward the elevators. Neither of them noticed that the decision they believed was still weeks away was already moving toward them faster than either expected. 2 days passed. Elijah tried to return to normal life. He repaired ventilation units, answered maintenance requests, picked Noah up from school, helped him study for a science quiz. Yet every quiet moment brought him back to the office on the 52nd floor and the woman who seemed to carry an entire company on her shoulders. By Friday afternoon, rain drifted across Chicago in thin silver lines. Elijah parked outside Noah's elementary school and checked the clock on the dashboard. 3:15. Dismissal was usually quick. Parents gathered near the entrance. Children poured onto the sidewalks carrying backpacks larger than they were. But at 3:20, Noah still had not appeared. Elijah frowned and stepped out into the drizzle. Before he could reach the school doors, his phone vibrated. The number was unfamiliar. "Mr. Brooks?" a calm female voice asked. "Yes." "This is Evelyn Sterling." Elijah stopped walking. Rain tapped softly against the hood of a nearby car. "Is everything all right?" he asked immediately. "Everything is fine," she said. "At least I hope it is. I am calling because I believe I accidentally picked up your son." Elijah blinked. "You what?" Across town, Evelyn stood beneath the covered entrance of a private art center. Beside her, a boy sat on a bench swinging his legs. Noah looked completely relaxed. In fact, he looked entertained. "To be fair," Evelyn said, rubbing her forehead, "he approached me first." Noah grinned when she glanced his way. "That is true." Elijah closed his eyes briefly. How exactly did this happen? "There was a transportation mix-up involving a school enrichment program," Evelyn explained. "The coordinator thought I was collecting another child. Your son corrected them. Then somehow we started talking." Noah leaned closer to the phone. "Dad, she bought me hot chocolate." Elijah could hear the excitement in his voice. "You did not tell me you knew a CEO." Evelyn looked at the boy in surprise. "You know what a chief executive officer is?" Noah shrugged. "I watch documentaries." Elijah could not help smiling despite himself. That sounded exactly like Noah. Curious, fearless, forever asking questions. "I am on my way," Elijah said. 30 minutes later, he arrived at the art center. The rain had stopped. The streets glistened beneath the fading afternoon light. Through the glass entrance, he spotted them immediately. Noah sat beside Evelyn at a small table. Between them was an unfinished sketchbook. They were talking about something serious. Or at least serious by Noah's standards. Planets, probably. Elijah pushed through the doors. Noah jumped up first. "Dad." The boy hurried over. Elijah rested a hand on his shoulder before looking toward Evelyn. She stood slowly. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then, Noah broke the silence. "Dad, did you know she cannot draw?" Evelyn stared at him. "That was supposed to remain confidential." Noah laughed. A real laugh. Bright enough to fill the room. Elijah watched the exchange. Something about it caught him off guard. The powerful executive he had met in that office seemed different here. Lighter somehow. Less guarded. As they walked toward the exit, Noah glanced up at him. "She looks lonely," he said quietly. Elijah froze for half a second. The exact same thought had crossed his own mind days earlier. Ahead of them, Evelyn stood waiting near the door, unaware of the conversation. Beyond the glass, evening settled over the city. And for reasons Elijah could not yet explain, the distance between their two worlds suddenly felt a little smaller. That night, Noah would not let the subject go. The apartment smelled faintly of tomato soup and toasted bread. Homework covered half the kitchen table. A half-finished model rocket rested beside a bowl of fruit. Ordinary things. Familiar things. Yet somehow Evelyn Sterling had followed them home in conversation. "She is nice," Noah said while tightening a small plastic fin onto the rocket. Elijah rinsed dishes at the sink. "You met her for less than an hour. That is enough sometimes." Elijah glanced over his shoulder. Noah looked completely serious. "You sound older every year." Noah grinned. "My science teacher says wisdom can appear at any age." Elijah laughed softly. Later, after Noah went to bed, the apartment became quiet. The city lights outside shimmered through the living room window. Elijah sat alone with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. His eyes drifted toward the business card Evelyn had given him days earlier. He had never intended to keep it. Yet there it was, resting beside the lamp. He thought about Sophie, about the photograph on the desk, about the tired look behind Evelyn's confident expression. Most of all, he thought about trust. The next morning arrived bright and clear. Saturday sunlight poured across the city. Elijah and Noah spent the morning finishing their rocket project at a neighborhood park. Children chased soccer balls across open grass. Families gathered beneath picnic shelters. It was the kind of day that reminded Elijah what mattered. Around noon, his phone vibrated. A text message. Evelyn. He stared at the screen for several seconds before opening it. The message was simple. No pressure. No negotiations. Just honesty. Sophie asked about you and Noah. Apparently, she heard a great deal about both of you yesterday. Elijah smiled despite himself. Before he could reply, another message appeared. Would you be willing to meet her? Nothing official. Just lunch. Elijah looked toward Noah, who was carefully adjusting the rocket launch pad. The boy seemed happy. Grounded. Safe. Exactly the way Elijah wanted him to feel. Yet something told him this meeting mattered. Not because of contracts. Not because of lawyers or board members. Because somewhere in the middle of all this, there was a 12-year-old girl whose future felt uncertain. By early afternoon, they arrived at a small cafe overlooking the Chicago River. The place was quiet, comfortable, nothing like the executive dining rooms Elijah imagined someone like Evelyn usually visited. Sophie was already there, sketchbook open, pencil moving quickly across the page. She looked up when they entered. Her eyes immediately landed on Noah. You are the documentary kid, she said. Noah blinked. You are the girl with the sketchbook. Sophie nodded. Fair. Within 5 minutes they were talking as if they had known each other for months. Across the table, Evelyn watched in silence. Elijah noticed the way her shoulders relaxed, the way she stopped checking her phone, the way she smiled whenever Sophie laughed. It was a small moment, easy to miss, but Elijah saw it. And as he watched the four of them sitting together beneath the afternoon sunlight, something unexpected happened. For the first time since walking into Evelyn's office, the impossible arrangement she had proposed no longer felt entirely impossible. The following week unfolded in ways none of them expected. Elijah assumed the lunch would be a one-time meeting. A pleasant afternoon. Nothing more. Yet somehow Sophie and Noah kept finding reasons to stay connected. One day, it was a science exhibit at the Museum of Science and Industry. The next, it was a sketch competition Sophie wanted Noah to judge despite his complete lack of artistic qualifications. Every invitation seemed to arrive through Evelyn, and every invitation somehow included her as well. By Thursday evening, Elijah found himself standing in the produce aisle of a neighborhood grocery store with a shopping basket in one hand and his phone in the other. A message from Evelyn had just appeared. Sophie wants to learn how to make pancakes. Apparently Noah informed her that your recipe is famous. Elijah smiled. Famous was a generous description. The recipe came from his grandmother and involved nothing more complicated than patience and too much vanilla extract. Still, 30 minutes later, he found himself replying yes. Saturday morning arrived bright and cool. When Evelyn and Sophie arrived at the apartment, Sophie immediately headed for the kitchen. Noah followed close behind, carrying a notebook labeled Official Pancake Research. Within minutes, flour dust floated through the air like fresh snow. Batter landed where batter was never supposed to land. Noah insisted every pancake should be tested for scientific accuracy. Sophie argued that taste mattered more than measurements. Across the kitchen, Elijah watched the debate while trying not to laugh. Evelyn stood quietly beside the counter holding a coffee mug. She looked strangely uncertain. I have never done this before, she admitted. Elijah glanced at her. Made pancakes. Spent a Saturday morning doing absolutely nothing important. He looked around the apartment. Noah was laughing. Sophie was sketching a pancake that somehow resembled a rocket ship. Sunlight streamed through the windows. Looks important to me, he said. Evelyn followed his gaze. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she lowered her eyes into her coffee. The silence felt different now. Comfortable. Later that afternoon, while the children worked on their latest project in the living room, Evelyn wandered toward the refrigerator. Family photos covered the surface. School certificates. Grocery lists. A handwritten reminder about Noah's dentist appointment. Ordinary. Pieces of life. She studied them carefully. You keep everything, she said. Elijah shrugged. Most of it matters. Her eyes paused on a photograph of Noah, holding a homemade trophy from years earlier. The edges were bent. The frame was inexpensive, yet Elijah had displayed it as proudly as any award. Evelyn stared at it longer than expected. In her penthouse downtown, walls displayed achievements worth millions of dollars. Yet somehow this single photograph seemed more valuable. When she finally turned away, something had shifted inside her. She could not explain it. She only knew that for the first time in years, she was standing inside a home where nobody expected anything from her except her presence. And that feeling was becoming harder to leave behind. 3 days later, Elijah learned something he had never expected. It happened by accident. The maintenance department was updating archived employee records when a supervisor asked him to help move several storage boxes to a lower floor. It was routine work, dusty folders, forgotten paperwork, the kind of task nobody remembered a week later. Elijah was carrying the final box when a thin file slipped loose and landed on the floor. He bent down automatically. One page had partially slid free. Before he could return it, a familiar name caught his eye. Evelyn Sterling. He immediately looked away. It was not his business. Yet another document had fallen beside it. This one was older, much older. The date near the top stopped him. Nearly 15 years ago. The supervisor called his name from down the hallway, and Elijah quickly gathered everything and placed it back inside the box. The moment should have ended there. Instead, later that afternoon, he found himself thinking about it. Not because of curiosity, because of something he had noticed. The file was unusually thick. Dozens of pages. Medical reports. Legal documents. Correspondence. The kind of records people carried only after life had forced them through difficult seasons. That evening, Elijah met Evelyn and the children at a community science fair. Noah proudly explained a project involving renewable energy. Sophie displayed a collection of architectural sketches she hoped to turn into real buildings someday. Parents moved through the exhibit hall carrying coffee cups and folding chairs. The atmosphere felt warm, familiar, normal. Elijah noticed Evelyn standing near the back wall watching the children. She looked peaceful. Then her phone rang. Everything changed. Not dramatically, not visibly to most people, but Elijah saw it. The color drained slightly from her face. Her shoulders stiffened. The smile disappeared. She listened for several seconds without speaking. Finally, she answered with only 3 words. I understand. Tomorrow morning. Then she ended the call. When she turned around, the mask was back in place. Calm, professional, controlled. But Elijah had seen the brief crack before it closed. Later, as families began leaving, Noah and Sophie raced ahead toward the parking lot. Their laughter echoed through the cool evening air. Evelyn and Elijah followed several steps behind. Bad news? He asked gently. She stared toward the city lights glowing beyond the river. Just business. Elijah nodded. He could have left it there. Most people would have. Instead, he said something else. You know, every time you say it is just business, you look like somebody carrying a refrigerator by themselves. Evelyn blinked. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed. A real laugh. Short but genuine. That is a strangely specific comparison. I work in maintenance, Elijah replied. We think about heavy objects a lot. The laughter faded, but the warmth remained. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The children continued running ahead beneath the streetlights. Finally, Evelyn looked toward him. Do you ever regret it? She asked quietly. Regret what? Choosing Noah over everything else. Elijah did not need time to think. Not for 1 second. The answer came so quickly that even he was surprised by it. Evelyn lowered her eyes. The evening breeze moved a strand of hair across her face. I used to think success meant never sacrificing anything, she admitted. Now I am not so sure. Elijah looked toward Noah. The boy was helping Sophie carry a poster board twice her size. Neither seemed to notice the challenge. They were too busy laughing. Sometimes, Elijah said softly, the things we give up become the reason the rest of it matters. Evelyn followed his gaze. For a long time she said nothing. And in that silence, she realized something that unsettled her more than any board meeting ever could. The man standing beside her was not impressive because of what he had achieved. He was impressive because of what he had willingly given away for someone he loved. The call Evelyn had received at the science fair turned into a storm by Monday morning. News traveled quickly inside Sterling Industries. Board members arrived early. Attorneys filled conference rooms. Advisors who had once spoken with confidence now spoke in careful whispers. By noon, rumors had reached nearly every floor of the building. A major investor was threatening to withdraw support. Control of the company suddenly felt less secure than it had a week earlier. Yet the strangest part was not the financial uncertainty. It was the silence that followed Evelyn home. That evening she stood alone in her penthouse overlooking the Chicago skyline. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass. Lights shimmered across the lake. Traffic flowed beneath her like rivers of gold. Everything she owned remained exactly where it had always been. Yet the apartment felt emptier than ever. Her phone rang 3 times. She ignored it. Emails arrived. She ignored those too. Finally, without fully understanding why, she picked up her keys and left. 40 minutes later, she stood outside Elijah's apartment building. The hallway smelled faintly of fresh paint and laundry detergent. Ordinary, familiar, human. She almost turned around. Then the door opened. Noah appeared first. "Miss Evelyn." His face brightened immediately. "Dad, she is here." Elijah stepped into view carrying a dish towel over one shoulder. He looked surprised but not alarmed. "Everything okay?" Evelyn glanced down the hallway. For the first time in years, she did not know how to answer that question. Elijah studied her for a moment. Then he stepped aside. "Come in." No speeches. No explanations. Just 3 simple words. She entered quietly. The apartment felt exactly as she remembered. Warm lighting. Family photographs. A half-finished school project spread across the dining table. The smell of homemade chili drifted from the kitchen. Nothing expensive. Nothing impressive. Yet somehow everything felt solid. Noah returned to his homework while Elijah stirred a pot on the stove. Neither demanded answers. Neither asked about stock prices or legal battles. The absence of questions felt almost unbelievable. After several minutes, Elijah handed her a bowl. "Dinner." Evelyn accepted it with both hands. The warmth surprised her. So did the kindness. They ate at the small kitchen table while Noah explained a science assignment involving renewable energy. At one point, he became so enthusiastic that he accidentally knocked over a spoon. Everyone laughed. Even Evelyn. The sound startled her. She could not remember the last time she had laughed on a difficult day. Later, after Noah disappeared into his room, silence settled across the apartment. Not the cold silence of boardrooms. Not the lonely silence of penthouses. A softer silence. The kind that allowed people to breathe. Evelyn stared into the remains of her tea. "I might lose everything," she admitted quietly. Elijah sat across from her. He did not rush to reassure her. He did not offer motivational speeches. He simply listened. Finally, he nodded once. "Maybe." The honesty caught her off guard. Then he continued. "But I do not think everything is what you think it is." Evelyn looked around the apartment. At the family photos. At the school papers on the refrigerator. At the light still glowing beneath Noah's bedroom door. For the first time all week, the weight on her shoulders felt lighter. Not because her problems had disappeared, because someone had quietly reminded her that a person's worth was larger than a title, a company, or a balance sheet. And somewhere deep inside, a truth she had been avoiding for years finally began to take shape. Spring turned into summer. The crisis that had threatened Sterling Industries did not disappear overnight, but neither did Evelyn. Day by day, meeting by meeting, she fought for the company she had spent years building. Some investors stayed. Others left. Some board members changed their minds. Others did not. Yet through it all, something inside her had changed. She no longer measured every victory in dollars and percentages. Some evenings, she could be found at Noah's baseball games sitting beside Sophie on aluminum bleachers. Other weekends, she helped with science projects she barely understood. Life had become smaller in the best possible way. 1 year later, the city stood wrapped in golden afternoon sunlight. Chicago shimmered beneath a clear blue sky. Elijah arrived at a quiet lakeside park after receiving a message from Evelyn asking if they could meet. Nothing urgent, she had promised. Just important. He found her waiting beneath a large oak tree overlooking the water. Sophie sat nearby sketching the skyline while Noah attempted to skip stones across the lake. The 2 children looked taller than they had a year earlier. Happier too. Evelyn held a slim folder in her hands. The sight made Elijah laugh. "Please tell me that is not another contract." Evelyn smiled. The expression came easier now than it once had. "No." He raised an eyebrow. "That is reassuring." She handed him the folder. Elijah opened it slowly. The first page caught him completely by surprise. He read it once, then again. His eyes lifted toward her. Adoption papers? Evelyn nodded. Her voice was quiet. Sophie asked if Noah could officially become her cousin someday. Noah suggested we make the arrangement permanent. Elijah laughed softly. That sounded exactly like them. Practical solutions from two children who viewed the world differently than adults. He looked down at the papers once more. Evelyn watched him carefully. You do not have to answer today, she said. I know. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The breeze moved gently through the trees overhead. Beyond them, Noah and Sophie continued debating the proper technique for skipping stones. Then Evelyn reached into the folder and removed a second document. Elijah stared at it. The familiar format. The official seals. The signature lines. This time there was no mention of trusts. No mention of board members. No mention of company control. Just two names and the possibility of a future. Evelyn looked toward the lake before speaking. The first time I asked you for help, I was afraid of losing everything. Elijah remained silent. She continued. The truth is, I had already lost the things that mattered most. I just did not know it yet. Her eyes found his. Then you and Noah reminded me. The world seemed unusually quiet. Not empty. Peaceful. The kind of silence that appears when nothing needs to be proven. Elijah looked at the children, then at the papers, then at the woman standing beside him. 1 year earlier, she had offered him an arrangement. What stood before him now was something entirely different. Slowly he smiled. And somewhere between the lake, the laughter of two children, and the stack of papers neither of them had expected, they finally understood that the greatest changes in life rarely arrive through grand gestures. Sometimes they arrive through kindness, patience, and the simple decision to stay when walking away would have been easier.